So what we're going to do in this module is, this really is an introduction to the whole scope of medicinal chemistry, and then you're going to go on in other lecture courses to discover more specifically about specific areas. So if you go to the first page of the handout and look at the synopsis, you'll see that today we're really going to look through a sort of global history of medicinal chemistry, from prehistory through to the end of sort of the 1800s. We'll then spend 2 lectures really focusing on antibiotics and how bacteria are treated chemically and the chemistry of that. And we'll have a lecture on how some viruses are treated in lecture 4 and the chemistry of that. In lectures 5, 6 and 7, we'll turn our attention away from the drugs themselves and into your body and begin to think about what happens to the medicine inside your body chemically. How does your body process medicines, and how does that affect the way that we design new medicines? Those lectures are very closely related to what pharmacy students would go and learn doing pharmacy courses at university. And then in the final 8th lecture, we'll try and bring that all together in looking at a class of neurotransmitter drugs in particular. So we are really covering a very broad scope of medicinal chemistry in my part of this module. You'll then go on and have courses dealing specifically with the biology of disease from Marek Brzozowski, who will look at disease from a much more biological point of view, and you'll be able to marry that together with my chemical viewpoint and come to a more holistic understanding of medicinal chemistry and the chemistry of disease. Okay? You'll also have courses focusing in on cancer. So we don't talk a lot here about cancer in this course because you have a whole course on it. A course looking at metals in medicine, and courses about computer-aided design and modern drug discovery in particular. This is a module that particularly prepares you for going out for jobs in the pharmaceutical industry, of course. Looking over the page, it's probably worth noting, because I didn't put it on here, but if you're interested in books to read on introductory medicinal chemistry, anything written by Graham Patrick, and there are a number of those in the library. His books are very good. He has one that's just called Medicinal Chemistry, one that's called Intro to Medicinal Chemistry. None of them are really a course book, because what I'm doing here is trying to pull together lots of different things, but you'll find things in his books that link through to some of the key ideas from this and other courses. But I wouldn't describe them as a course book, but if you're interested in the area, they're good primers to medicinal chemistry. And we've got a set of learning objectives, and we'll be working through roughly 2 of those each lecture. So, as I said, the other thing just worth noting is I marked a few things in the handout. This is the best module, right? In my opinion, it's one of the more interesting ones. And to just point that out, I put a little cocktail symbol at various points on the handout. These are the things where you can go and tell the people that didn't choose this module what they're missing out on. It's like the really simple things. When you're down the pub or over a coffee with them, you say, oh, what we learned about today was this, and they'll be really annoyed that they're doing some boring module on reaction intermediates or whatever it might be. Right. So today we're really going to start at the beginning of time, and it's fair to say that wherever humanity developed, we've always used medicines. We've always made use of medicinal plants. It's well known that even animals will eat certain plants at certain times of year because they have a certain effect on them. So there are certain horses down in the areas where the apples fall from the trees and they rot and they ferment, that they particularly like to eat the fermented apples every year, and that's because the horses like to get drunk. And that's something that they've learned and passed on, and all animals are the same. They note physiologically that if they eat something, it has an effect, and if it's an effect they like or is beneficial to them, they'll do it more. And this is really how medicine evolved in the earliest days. And if we think about ancient approaches to medicine, we can look to various different cultures, and we're going to look to each of them really, but we're going to start by considering Egyptian culture. And the reason that Egyptian culture is often considered first, well, firstly it's because lots of the history that you get taught is European and is overly focused on Egyptian culture, but it's also because they wrote everything down that they did. They were really the first culture to leave written records that have remained to this day. And so if we look back into the Egyptian records, we can find from 2100 BC, it's the item that's shown here, and that is the oldest ever written prescription. Okay, so that's what that particular tablet of stone is showing. It's the oldest written prescription. So that's about 4,000 years old. And in actual fact, each column is a prescription there. Obviously, that's fragmentary knowledge. It's just a little bit. But that's the oldest that you can go back and find written evidence of medicinal chemistry. There are then two really important papyruses in Egyptian culture, the Edwin Smith one from 1600 and the Ebers, which is the really famous one from 1550. And that's a whole papyrus with loads of information in it about Egyptian culture, and you can track lots and lots of things back to that papyrus. And the history of medicine is one of the things that you trace back to that papyrus. And it's a complete, within that papyrus, is a complete written medical treatise. How every condition in the Egyptian era was treated is written down in the Ebers papyrus. And so that's really quite significant. This is the oldest complete written medical treatise. I would point out, I'm not teaching you history, I'm teaching you chemistry. I don't want you to learn all these dates and all these names, right? I just want to give you a span of the scope of the history of medicine. And we'll see later in the course how we might interrogate some of this knowledge through questions, okay? But I'm not expecting you to memorize each one of these facts. Common Egyptian ingredients, things like senna, honey, thyme, juniper, frankincense, cumin, colocynth, many herbal things, of course, all plant-based pretty much. Pomegranate root, henbane was used to treat worms, and all these things used to treat a whole range of disorders. You may sometimes think that Egyptian and ancient medicine is pointless. I would just point out that if you go into hospital even now, and you have problems with constipation, perhaps they're giving you opiate drugs that causes constipation, maybe you have problems with constipation at home, I don't want to know your personal issues, the drug you will get is still senna. It is still extract of senna. It has not changed. There is not a better drug for milder, good drug for constipation. This is still used in the modern world, pretty much unchanged, other than the senna is extracted a bit and turned into a pill. So there is clear reasons why these things were used, because some of them would work. Okay? Also in Egypt, like many ancient medicinal traditions, there was a big role played by demonology and spirituality, and there was this interface between religion and superstition and medicine, and that goes right through the history of medicine. We're going to see that keep coming back in different forms as we go through. And there's no doubt that the mind has great powers over the body, as we'll see a little bit later on. So there are reasons why spirituality and medicine are connected as well. So you have all this going on in Egypt. The other big global civilization on a global scale at that time was the Chinese civilization. And Chinese medicine was doing very similar things at a very similar period in history to what Egyptian medicine was doing. The difference is, in one sense, that there are no written records left from that era in Chinese medicine. Okay? But Emperor Shen Nung was known as the founder of Chinese medicine, also sort of 1500 BC, and he was credited with developing agriculture in China, inventing Chinese tea, 365 herbal remedies, including plants containing ephedrine, still used as a drug. We'll see it in lecture 8 of this course. Morphine, still used as a drug. We'll see it later on today. And castor oil, still used as a drug. He divided plants into those with mild effects, moderate effects, and severe effects, and proposed that they might have medicinal uses. So he noted that ginseng was a stimulant, that's still used today in energy drinks. It is worth pointing out Emperor Shen Nung died from a toxic overdose. Working in medicine always has a few dangers and risks. And what happened about 200 BC to 300 AD is that all of the knowledge which had been orally passed on in Chinese culture up to that point got compiled into what's called a pharmacopoeia. So over this period, the knowledge was compiled into a pharmacopoeia. And now that Chinese medicine pharmacopoeia has something like 13,000 medicinals, so different active extracts of things, and they appear in 100,000 different formulations. And you can see this kind of pharmacopoeia, the Divine Farmer's Materia Medica, a translation of this set of Chinese medicine knowledge. And then in 1941 AD, the Handbook of Traditional Drugs was printed. Significantly, this was done as part of the revolution in China. They wanted to cement the knowledge and build the foundation of a strong state for the future, and one of the things they did was try to pull together all the knowledge from history. And the Handbook of Traditional Drugs was put together in that era, and it really focused in on just over 500 drugs at that point. And of those, there were 400 plants, about 45 animal parts, and they're the ones that tend to be controversial, some of them, and 30 minerals. So historically, there are very few proper clinical trials of Chinese medicines, but there's no doubt that many of the herbals prescribed do have active ingredients which can, if the dose is right and controlled, and that's an issue with herbal medicine. How do you know the dose? Because from one plant to another plant, the dosage can vary. From season to season, the dosage of active ingredients in plants will vary. But if you can get that right, they have beneficial effects. And I've talked to chemists, probably all of you before, about artemisinin as an example, which was discovered as a consequence of traditional Chinese medicine, the extract of the Artemisia tree, and ultimately this led to the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 2015. And it had been known since ancient history that the extract of the Artemisia tree was good for malarial types of fevers. So codifying that knowledge, understanding that knowledge, is still an important part of medicine. There are other global traditions that it's worth noting that are out there. So Ayurveda is Indian medicine, Indian traditional medicine, and that started really in about 1500 BC, and you can still get Ayurvedic therapies. One of the things that's very widely investigated currently in Ayurveda is the neem tree. I'll just put that's widely investigated. You can go out, if you look up neem tree online, you'll find it can cure everything from cancer through to bacterial infections through to so on. And there's no doubt that there's a lot of interesting chemistry within the neem tree and various other of these natural products. The key is pinning it down. From the perspective of Western medicine, what is it? How much do you need? Why does it work? What's the mechanisms of the resistance? What's the chemistry? And that's really the journey that medicine has gone on that we're going to tell over these first few lectures, going from the extract of the plant through to properly understanding why it functions, getting it in a pure, dosable, safe form. South American cultures, probably their most famous contributions to modern medicine, are the cinchona tree, which is the source of quinine, which doesn't just taste good in a gin and tonic, it's also a treatment still for malaria. It's the original malaria treatment. Quite a lot of malarial parasites are now resistant, but it still works in many cases. And the other one that's quite famous in South American culture is the coca leaf, which of course gives you cocaine, which is a stimulant. Native North American culture, probably their most famous medicinal product is mescaline, which is an extract of cactus. We'll talk about that more in lecture 8, and that's hallucinogenic. It's actually used in North American culture to access a kind of dream state, which is an important part of the way North American culture society bonds together, and we'll talk a bit more about that in the last lecture of the course. And if you look to Aboriginal Australian culture, then One of the interesting products coming from there that's really widely used everywhere is tea tree oil. That originally comes from Aboriginal use, and it has a mild antimicrobial and antifungal use. And in Aboriginal culture, as in many of these cultures, they believed that diseases were natural or supernatural. So there was this use of the spirit world around disease and this kind of slightly mystical aspect to disease. You might think it's crazy, but we still talk about health even here in the UK, and we talk about physical health and mental health, right? They're not different things, really. They're all physical health. It's all your body. It's not that one is somehow spiritual and supernatural. But that distinction between the two, you can probably track all the way back to this idea of natural diseases and supernatural diseases, diseases of the body and diseases of the spirit, or diseases of the soul. And it still causes massive inequalities in healthcare funding even now in the UK, right?